Well, I failed. This series was supposed to be an attempt to talk to the future, to transcend the present shock of our era, to expand our time horizons to something more appropriate for the climate crisis. Vlog to the Future was supposed to be a recurring series so that this channel would have some regular bleeping content. But here we are, 6 months and a mere 2 videos later, and I failed as simple a promise as, hey, let's stay in touch. I also managed to ask future generations something as insensitive as, how's the weather? Not only has the future been cancelled, the future has probably cancelled me. I'm sorry. In my defense, I'm very lazy. And I'm just as caught up in the never-ending feed of the perpetual now as everybody else. With all that said, I think the trouble with talking to the future goes beyond the cultural perception of time, or lack thereof. Who are you? I know the answer in the sense that's supposed to matter, namely our children's children's children. But that's vague, and it's hard talking to you if I don't know who or even what you are. Are you even alive? No, wait, that's a silly question. If you're watching, of course you're alive. Then again, I could be talking to myself, or to the cold indifference of eternity. But let's grant that you're alive though. Will you be different? I hope so. It would be disappointing if you still thought factory farming was okay. Some people expect that a century from now, you'll look back on us and condemn our cruel exploitation of animals in the same way that we today condemn slavery. But I hope you'll go the extra step and actually abolish factory farming and not preserve it in a different form. Like how slavery still exists, we just don't call it that and don't think about it with the same moral outrage. However, ethics isn't my strong suit. It's not even my regular suit. It's like one sock with a hole in it. So let's talk about something where I can at least cite a couple of books. There is a different way you could be different, a more fundamental way. I'm talking about genetic engineering. In his book Falter, Bill McKibben talks about the danger that genetic engineering poses to what he calls the human game, which is the sum total of culture and commerce and politics, of religion and sport and social life, of dance and music, of dinner and art and cancer and sex and Instagram, of love and loss, of everything that comprises the experience of our species. The human game is a broad concept, and there are no clear rules, but there are 2 imperatives. 1, keep it going. 2, keep it human. Now, gene editing holds great potential to cure diseases caused by genetic mutations, such as sickle cell anemia. Just snip away at the broken gene and you're good to go. This is called somatic genetic engineering, or gene therapy, and McKibben considers this benign. It's an extension of traditional medicine, it's repair, and it's not threatening to the human game. But he warns that it's a small step from repairing to improving, and this is where it gets dicey. You see, it's possible in the future for parents to have the embryo of their unborn child genetically edited in order to give the child certain characteristics of their parents' choosing, designer babies. This is called germline genetic engineering, and McKibben thinks this could rob the human game of meaning. Why? Well, he never uses this term, but I think you could sum it up in one word: alienation. With genetic engineering, alienation takes on many different and completely new forms. McKibben compares germline engineering with performance-enhancing drugs and how they kill the joy of sports. And it's deeper than just cheating. Can an athlete take full credit for winning a race, a match, or tournament while on drugs? In the same way, if you were genetically engineered to run faster or be smarter, stronger, or whatever, could you really feel pride in those skills? Faster, stronger, smarter, like, is that you? Or just your edited genes? That could alienate you from your own skills and achievements. I think this gets creepier when you consider that you can edit genes in ways that affect serotonin levels. Parents could design their babies to be happy. This might sound alright, but what kind of happiness would that be? I think it would be tainted with something, because you could ask that same question. Are you happy because you're happy, or because of your edited genes? You could end up alienated from your own happiness. Then there's the issue of how germline engineering turns people into a form of technology. And if anything's true about technology, it's that eventually it becomes obsolete. Your parents may give you the latest and the greatest in gene hacks when you're born, but a year or two later, some other parents will give their kids the latest and greatest. Those kids will have better specs than you. And for that reason, you might end up alienated from your genetically edited peers, as well as your non-edited ones. All this is enough, in my opinion, to potentially cause existential despair. But McKibben goes on to explain that germline engineering would make people so different from both future and past people that they would become marooned on an island in time in a way that no human being has ever been before or will be again. So you would be alienated from both the past and the future. But possibly the greatest issue with genetic engineering on a personal level is that you can't consent to it. These edits are imposed upon you by your parents before you're even born. Now, you might argue that parents impose lots on their children already, like religion, values, and lifestyles, and parents might pressure their children to do well at school so that they'll end up with a good education. And that's perfectly within their parents' rights and freedoms. So why not go the extra step and grant parents the freedom to alter their kids' genes to achieve the same goals? Well, the difference is that you can rebel against your upbringing. You can reject your parents' religion or values or lifestyles. And to many people, rebellion is a major part of their journey to self-discovery. But it's impossible to reject your altered genes. That's impossible to rebel against. It robs you of your freedom to self-determination. So you would be alienated from yourself and your own free will. And imagine the trauma that could cause. So why would anyone do this? Well, even if parents don't want to alter their kids' DNA, they might feel pressured to, because all the other successful parents are doing it, and you don't want your kids to be left behind, do you? There could be a genetic engineering arms race of a kind. And more creepy than that, since it's the parents choosing these genetic modifications, their choices would reflect their values. And the hegemonic ideology today is... oh crap. Neoliberalism is about to reach into your DNA. There's no alternative, it's genetic now. This gets us to the scariest part of germline engineering: class. The rich will afford more genetic engineering than the poor, which risks creating not only material but biological class differences. The rich and poor would eventually become different species, with no ability to crossbreed and with as much romantic interest in each other as a current human would have for a chimpanzee. And what would happen to us naturals who can't afford genetic engineering? Maybe we'll become slaves. And that's not conjecture on neither mine nor Bill McKibben's part. That's speculation by people who do research on this and found startups. And worryingly, they don't seem to be too troubled by this. Furthermore, these genetic changes don't end with the genetically engineered child. They would be passed on to future generations, and holy shit, that's eugenicsy as fuck. So the answer to the question, who are you, might be the genetically engineered offspring of rich people believing themselves to be Übermensch. And you're looking at me right now as if I was a chimpanzee. Maybe I am talking to myself. McKibben paints a justifiably dystopian picture of the dangers of germline engineering, which could make the worst problems in the world even worse. But what if instead of neoliberal improvements, you use this technology instead for a radically different purpose, one that could help us in the age of climate change? Enter Donna J. Haraway. In her book by the same title, she talks about the importance of staying with the trouble, which is, briefly put, about living and dying well on a damaged planet. Staying with the trouble has one key similarity with McKibben's human game. As already mentioned, the human game has two imperatives: keep it going and keep it human. Staying with the trouble is also about ongoingness, as Haraway would put it, but she would maybe disagree that it's essential to keep it human, or at least only human. A vital part of staying with the trouble is to do so in a multi-species alliance. She warns us against succumbing to human exceptionalism, where humans believe they're distinct from and more important than the rest of nature, and thus have a right to endlessly exploit and extract. We should question the distinctions we make between human and nature and human and animals. Haraway uses the term critter to collectively refer to microbes, plants, animals, humans, and non-humans. In order to successfully stay with the trouble, we need to form bonds with other critters. We need to, in Haraway's expression, make kin. Because these bonds, well, that's what life is. Nothing makes itself, she writes. Critters interpenetrate one another, loop around and through one another, eat each other, get indigestion, and partially digest and partially assimilate one another, and thereby establish symbiotic arrangements that are otherwise known as cells, organisms, and ecological assemblages. Critters do not precede their relatings, they make each other through them. But what does genetic engineering have to do with any of this? One more tangent before I get to that. The philosopher Thomas Nagel famously asked, "What is it like to be a bat?" He made the point that animals have different ways of orienting themselves in the world with different sensory apparatuses, like echolocation, that are so unlike from that of humans that it's impossible for us to imagine what their world is like. To quote Nagel, "Anyone who has spent some time in an enclosed space with an excited bat knows what it is to encounter a fundamentally alien form of life." Donna Haraway closes Staying with the Trouble with a fictional work, The Camille Stories, and here she imagines a way that we could find out what it is like to be a bat, or any other animal for that matter. This is where Haraway's alternative vision for genetic engineering comes in. The Camille Stories describe a type of future society, the communities of compost, that are committed to staying with the trouble and making kin. In these communities, some people are symbionts, that is, people who have been genetically engineered to be more like a certain animal. At birth, a few genes and a few microorganisms from the animal symbiont are added to the symchild's bodily heritage, so that sensitivity and response to the world as experienced by the animal critter can be more vivid and precise for the human member of the team. In the communities of compost, there are all sorts of symbionts, made from insects, fish, birds, crustaceans, amphibians, and yes, bats. And their animal genes affect how they experience the world. The symbiont children developed both the visible traits and subtle sensory similarities to their animal partners in early childhood. Camille 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, the protagonists of this multi-generational story, have the monarch butterfly as their animal symbionts. Haraway describes the experiences of Per, that's the gender-neutral pronoun of this world, like this. Camille 1 received genes allowing her to taste in the wind the dilute chemical signals crucial to adult monarchs selecting diverse nectar-rich flowers and the best milkweed leaves for depositing their eggs. Camille 1's gut and mouth microbiomes were enhanced to allow a pair to safely savor milkweed plants containing the toxic alkaloids that the monarchs accumulate in their flesh to deter predators. It even goes beyond genetics when, at initiation age of 15, as a coming-of-age gift, the second Camille decided to ask for chin implants of butterfly antenna, a kind of tentacular beard, so that more vivid tasting of the flying insect's world would become the heritage of the human partner too. Okay, so asking the same question now as in the previous section, why would you do this? Well, the communities of Compost make it a point out of creating symbionts out of critically endangered species. So part of it is preservation. And it stands to reason that if some humans can experience the world like an endangered species, it would help out in protecting that species' habitat and whatnot. But more than that, I think it's an attempt to overcome the greatest alienation of them all, namely our alienation from nature. Many believe that this is the fundamental cause of our current ecological crisis, because if you don't consider yourself part of nature, you can objectify nature. And if you can objectify nature, you can commodify nature. And from there, the perverse incentives run their course. Now, this kind of genetic engineering runs into some of the same ethical quandaries that come with the germline genetic engineering we discussed earlier. These symbiont children can't consent. We can't know in advance all the consequences of this. And to be fair, Haraway herself doesn't paint an unambiguously rosy picture. The symbiont children developed a complex subjectivity composed of loneliness, intense sociality, intimacy with non-human others, specialness, lack of choice, fullness of meaning, and sureness of future purpose. Also, in the story, symbionts and non-symbionts occasionally struggle to understand and relate to one another. Some symbionts look down on the non-symbionts, while some non-symbionts regard symbionts as freaks. Wow, that was a sentence. But who said that staying with the trouble is going to be easy? I can't speak for Haraway's intentions, but I don't think the point of the story is to predict the future. Rather, I think it's an attempt to tell the story of humans and nature in a different way, to create new narratives, which is something that's also a theme of the book. It matters what ideas we use to think other ideas with. It matters what matters we use to think other matters with. It matters what stories we tell to tell other stories with. It matters what knots not knots, what thoughts think thoughts, what descriptions describe descriptions, what ties tie ties. It matters what stories make worlds, and what worlds make stories. Either way, I think this is fascinating stuff to think about, and I can't help but wonder what kind of symbiont I would be. Probably the pangolin. That qualifies, it's threatened with extinction. I relate hard to the pangolin. It looks just as nervous and awkward as I am. Hello, excuse me? Could you lend me a tissue? I left mine at home and I have a runny nose and I've already wiped on my wrist and now it's all wet and sticky. So, to answer again the question, who are you? You might be the last remnants of soon-to-be extinct species, a kind of genetic arc. Because indeed, by Generation 5, many humans are Sims with extinct partners. Perhaps you're not as alienated from nature as most of us are in the early 21st century. But there has to be a simpler way to bond with nature than to genetically engineer ourselves into animal-human hybrids. Like that, there has to be a simpler way. There has to be a simpler way. 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 tree. I am a tree. I am a tree. I am a tree. Thank you for watching. Do all the regular YouTube stuff, please. Anyway, since I've made time a theme of these vlogs to the future, I can't help but include one more quote from Haraway that I found beautiful and poignant. In urgent times, many of us are tempted to address trouble in terms of making an imagined future safe, of stopping something from happening that looms in the future, of clearing away the present and the past in order to make futures for coming generations. Staying with the trouble does not require such relationship to times called the future. In fact, staying with the trouble requires learning to be truly present, not as a vanishing pivot between awful or Edenic pasts and apocalyptic or salvific futures, but as mortal critters entwined in myriad unfinished configurations of places, times, matters, meanings.